Today we have 6 presentations under the common title Steps into Future, and we start from the Finnish experience. Jaakko Kuosmanen will talk about developments in the SOFI Science Advice Initiative of Finland framework. So, Jaakko, if you could limit yourself to 18 minutes so that we can have 1 or 2 short questions later. The screen and floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Tarmo. Thank you for the invitation to be here today, and thank you everyone, participants who are here this morning. So 3 years ago, we started this project actually, and we were in Dublin presenting some of our initial thoughts on where we might be going with this at the ESAF Dublin conference. So it's a pleasure to be back here and tell a little bit about what's actually happened during the 3 years. So basically, I'm going to share a little bit of overview of SOFI, our Science Advice Initiative, and some few observations on what we've also found along the way. So basically, the summary of what is actually SOFI is a national experimental initiative focusing on building next generation science advice ecosystem in Finland. We were funded by the Ministry of Education, and basically the project has been executed by the 4 Finnish academies as the coordinator of the project. Our main objectives had been to build a new permanent science policy platform in Finland. Secondly, we have a cultural objective, which is to promote dialogue between researchers and decision makers. And thirdly, to facilitate discussions on future of science advice, specifically the science advice ecosystem in Finland. And I'm pleased to say at the moment that we've achieved our first main objective, that we've been able to be successful enough that we are been building a new permanent science policy platform, which will continue after the project phase after 3 years. But what have we actually done, and what have we been doing, and how we have been doing it? So our methodology is basically a methodology of experimental development. So we have an evidence base on the basis of which we build hypotheses. We build prototypes of operating models that then we're piloting, we're testing, evaluating, and iteratively developing again. So basically, we used in the beginning a triangulation of methods to try to collate the evidence base on that which we used in our project. We did in Finland, we did a systems mapping of the existing ecosystem, its actors, its challenges, its gaps. We did a broad international and national research literature review, understanding exactly about the main challenges that are met in elsewhere in other ecosystems. We did surveys among, 400 professors. We did a survey. We interviewed 300 participants from different stakeholder groups, funders, civil servants, politicians, heads of universities, young researchers, old researchers, etc. We also tried to do a survey among MPs, but we got 18 answers because MPs will get about 250 emails per day. So we weren't very successful in that. Also, we've done a lot of international benchmarking, and we've been to go places like Holland and others to try to learn about what are the existing models there and how we could build on those in Finland. So based on those, we found a set of challenges that we started building and interventions on. So basically a new models of trying to tackle some of those challenges in our ecosystems. We experimented on them, we evaluated them with the participants, and we reiterated them again and tried to build the next phase of piloting. Well, we haven't done randomized controlled trials, so our evaluations are much less rigorous than RCTs, but still we've been able to get some reasonably good evidence about what works and what doesn't. So just to show very shortly our challenge map that we were basically using. So these were the key challenges that we found that we were trying to address with our interventions. We found that policymakers have challenges in making sense of the totality of available evidence. So basically to get the big picture, the systematic overview of what to make sense of everything, all the evidence available. We found that there's definitely a lack of fit-for-purpose, high-quality evidence synthesis in Finland. Also, there's a very strong path dependence in utilization of experts, and that the researchers have challenges in contextualizing their work for policy settings. So we tried to understand and also the underlying drivers of which we could then tackle and try to address with our work. Obviously, a lot of the drivers are quite systemic that cannot be addressed by small experimental initiatives like ours, but we also found quite a bit something that where we could potentially create some value on. So I won't go into these in detail, but here you can see a kind of overview of the analysis that we did for our work. So basically we built what we call 5 different operating models ourselves, and also we built others in collaboration with other actors. So these are the things that have been triggered by us, but we also built, I think, our most prominent one was built with the Prime Minister's Office strategy unit. We built 2 science panels. One was at the early stages of COVID 2020 to try to support the kind of early policymaking at the spring of 2020, and it was in an instrumental role in reopening the schools before the summer at the science panel that we built with the Prime Minister's Office. So our models have been, so one has been the scientific red teams, as we call them, which is a kind of interactive and iterative dialogues that are anchored in policy documents under preparation. So we do quite systemic cases, like you can see, like climate impact assessment, Nature Conservation Act, public sector strategy, and so forth. So we found that especially in these type of policy processes, there is a need for sense making of evidence, and especially that are anchored in policy documents under preparation. I can tell you more about those, but that's probably has been our most successful model so far, and it has been, we definitely found a niche in the system that has been missing. The second one is more kind of systematic reviews and evidence synthesis that are co-created on emerging complex policy issues. We're working on things like societal impact of quantum technology and others, kind of early phenomenons where there's also process value of bringing different stakeholder groups together quite early on. We've developed new models on brokering researchers. We found in Finland that we can break through the path dependence, and as we make it easy for policymakers to get on board new experts. We built an impact training program for researchers. We found that especially a lot has to do with science communication, and at the very end of kind of impact work in academia, but there's much less kind of training on kind of broader impact mindsets and skills that go beyond basically very thin understanding of science communication. We've also built a model where we domesticate international high quality scientific reports for national policy making. Finland is a small country, so we need to try to use as much of the high quality rigorous evidence that is being collated and built in international settings. So these have been basically the models that we've been building. We've been testing them to a degree, and some we have much more evidence on than others that they are working. As I said, I think our probably most successful is the scientific red teams, where we found that there was a gap missing in the kind of broader setting of the science advice services, if you'd call them, that are in policymaking. We found that especially using things like boundary objects, we use the policy documents under preparations as boundary objects, where we can bring the researchers much closer to the policy making and have more utility from the researcher input to the policy process. I think it has required a lot of trust and a lot of that the civil servants actually open the documents that are still unprepared for the scrutiny of the researchers. A lot of the work presently done is being either commissioned reports, either expert statements, or then expert interviews or expert discussions. But these were found to be quite unsatisfactory and insufficient by the civil servants. So we have gotten a lot of demand for this type of scientific red team. We do it quite small scale with simply only maybe 10 people max in room. So we don't have third parties there because it's basically, it needs to be all about evidence. So everyone needs to be on the same page of the dialogue. So you cannot have various different parties because otherwise it won't work. But we found that if you do them in a certain type of small scale settings, they can be quite adversarial, and actually they can be quite like rough and tough, but they are actually, everyone comes out of there quite happy about the feedback that they have received. As long as it doesn't become a public spectacle, people are open to very critical scrutiny in a small scale setting. That's the in a nutshell. So just a few observations that I want to also make about the work that we've been doing. The first is that I think there are significant opportunity windows exist for improvement of the science policy ecosystem, and especially, but that requires a lot of collaborative exploration. Politics underdetermines policy making, basically. And there's this, particularly we found that up at the upstream of policy making, there are a lot of opportunities in things like challenge definition, horizon scanning and foresight, and regulatory impact assessment, to name few, are kind of basically the domains of policy making where there's a lot more to be done still, that are very underdeveloped still. So before we can simply say that we, raise our hands up and say that we've done all we can in evidence-informed policy making, that now the politicians just make bad decisions, we also need to turn to ourselves and look at actually at the very early foundations and how we've actually formulated things with evidence. And there we found that there's a lot to be done. Exactly, we interviewed a lot of the civil servants, and they said that the existing kind of support models are insufficient, particularly in these type of complex policy issues where basically the demand for evidence is infinite, if you will. And we found also that when we spoke with actually those who are in charge of these services, like commissioning the reports and others, which are national research institutes, they said that the present models are actually sufficient and satisfactory, but we found a dissonance between the civil servants and between those who are delivering the services, the support services. And we started building with the civil servants these new models like the scientific red teaming. And we found that once we've done it quite collaboratively with them, we can easily find new places where we can create value and develop existing ecosystems. The second observation is that I think interaction in science policy ecosystem is very much under-systematized, and professional brokers are underutilized. We found that this is especially the case in Finland. I think in some ways, systematizing interaction in science policy is still at Middle Ages. We are still at very unsystematic stages where actually a lot of the time, basically it's satisfactory if just the two parties speak to each other. But that's quite often that can be, two-sided, one-way communication instead of actually being real interaction. So I think that, brokers, expert brokers can be used in very kind of crude basic things, even like event organization, facilitation, but also question framing, utilization of boundary objects, and selection of working methods and tools, which they can be expert on, which can mitigate talking past each other and try to frame the interaction, the situation in a way that is, beneficial for the parties as much as possible. There's still not enough utilization of social sciences in building these interactions. I think in Finland, at least, but I believe also more broadly, for example, cognitive psychology and behavioral insights aren't used very broadly in developing these type of models. So I think that's something that could be expanded on much more still. from the present. And also, I think without us, for example, if we'd had more budget, we would have, I think we've done our evaluations quite a bit internally, tried to make sense of actually what we have done, and also do with, with stakeholder feedbacks from the participants. And sometimes we've actually tried to do sense making with the civil servants that we found and stumbled on something that is of value, but we cannot quite clearly and immediately establish why and what has we done that actually has worked. So in that sense, I think there is a much more kind of room for systematizing interaction. And finally, I think that, never underestimate the power of language. It can be the pathway or the barrier to transforming new operating models into permanent structures. We found, for example, we started as a science advice initiative, but for example, the language of science advice has a lot of paternalistic connotations in the Finnish context. So once we've actually changed the discourse in different things, like we've discussed things like scientific red teams or scientific sparring or these type of different types of language that has been helpful definitely for us in kind of make pathway in kind of getting different stakeholders on board. Sometimes we found that we actually, in our work, we have to use 3 different languages, one for scientists, one for ourselves, and one for civil servants and politicians. And that's sometimes quite a bit of juggling. But also we found that once we do development work, it's important also to be quite flexible with the use of concepts, because then it sometimes can be useful to tap into discourses that are existing in the government. For example, if OECD's anticipatory governance is prevalent there, that's a conceptual discourse anchor that could be tapped into once you're building, your development work. Or if there's another national initiative, something that is, a development initiative inside the government that is trying to change the ways that the government is operating, then it might be helpful to tap into those languages in order for you to be successful. So basically, building operating models is the starting point for change, but then the concepts and culture are something that are, I wouldn't say they're necessary and sufficient, but I'd say that the tapping into familiar concepts is a necessary condition for the operating models to become new permanent structures. We also found some challenges in this. For example, our science panel was short-lived in the Prime Minister's office because we couldn't communicate its value and the concept well enough to the politicians. There were a lot of political reasons as well, which why the panel was short-lived, but this is one of those reasons as well. So I think in summary, but as I mentioned, the work continues. We build a new permanent collaborative science policy platform at the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters. We're continuing the development work on these early kind of successes on our operating models. We're expanding to new models as well, exploring them. We're building new partnerships and getting more resources on board from new partners so we can kind of take also the activities to the next level. But thank you very much. Thank you for your attention, and thank you, ESAF, good fellows on the other side of Baltic, in inviting me over to talk about SOFI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaakko. I think it was really inspiring and also full of facts and things which we didn't know before.